If you've ever felt the sting of rejection or dreamed of the perfect comeback, hit that subscribe button and share this video. The journey you're about to witness might just be the motivation you need today. The mahogany door of the conference room slammed behind me with a finality that echoed through the marble-floored corridor. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart pounding against my ribs, sweat trickling down my spine beneath my carefully pressed shirt. What had I just done? You're right, because in 2 months I'll own this building. The words hung in the air around me, my own voice still ringing in my ears. I had just burned the 64th bridge in 4 months of desperate job hunting, but this time felt different. This time, I wasn't leaving with my tail between my legs, rehearsing what I should have said. This time, I had finally stood up for myself. But at what cost? My name is Daniel Carter, and 12 weeks ago, I was a rising star at Innovate Systems. Today, I'm unemployed with dwindling savings and a mortgage payment due in 10 days. And I just walked out of the most promising interview I'd had since the layoffs. Let me take you back to how this all began. The first snow of February dusted Manhattan's sidewalks as I cleared out my desk at Innovate. The cardboard box in my hands contained 5 years of my life a novelty stress ball, a framed photo of my sister's wedding, a coffee mug with the company logo that I'd never use again but couldn't bring myself to leave behind. "I'm sorry, Daniel," said Malcolm Chen, my boss and mentor, his usually confident voice tinged with genuine regret. "The board's decision was unanimous. We're cutting the entire strategic development division." He stood awkwardly in the doorway of what had been my office until 3 hours ago, watching me pack. Malcolm was a legend in the industria, former Wall Street wunderkind who'd walked away from a 7-figure salary to start his own company. He'd hired me fresh out of Columbia Business School, convinced I had the right mix of analytical thinking and creative problem solving. "It's not personal," he added, as if that made it better. "You know I fought for your team." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without my voice cracking. It wasn't personal, it was worse. It was business. Cold, impersonal, ruthlessly efficient business. 15 people from my division, all extraordinary talents, all suddenly expendable. "Look," Malcolm said, lowering his voice, "I'm leaving too. Starting my own venture capital firm. Come with me." I looked up, surprised. "What?" "I need someone who thinks like you do, someone who can spot value others miss." His eyes were earnest. "The salary would be less, at first, but the equity—" "I can't," I interrupted. The words tumbled out before I could consider them. "Malcolm, I've got the mortgage, my dad's medical bills. I need something stable." Something flashed across his face: disappointment, maybe understanding. "The offer stands. Think about it." I didn't think about it. Not really. Instead, I walked out of Innovate Systems convinced that with my MBA, my track record of successful projects, and Malcolm's glowing recommendation, I'd have another corporate position within weeks. That was my first mistake. 63 rejections later, I stood in the elevator of the Meridian Tower, watching the numbers climb to the 47th floor. My suit, the same one I'd worn to the last dozen interviews, felt tight around the collar. I'd lost weight in the past months, but not from the gym routine I'd once maintained. This was the weight loss of skipped meals and stress-filled nights. Apex Solutions occupied the entire floor, their reception area designed to impress with minimalist furniture that probably cost more than my remaining savings. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the Manhattan skyline, a view meant to remind visitors of the company's literal and figurative elevated position. "Mr. Carter?" The receptionist's smile was practiced, professional. "Mr. Reeves will be with you shortly." I nodded, taking a seat on an uncomfortable avant-garde chair that seemed designed to keep visitors slightly on edge. My research on Apex had been more thorough than for any previous interview. Something about their financial reports had caught my attention. On paper, they were successful, a mid-sized consulting firm with impressive client testimonials. But there were inconsistencies, signs that the glossy exterior might be hiding structural problems. 23 minutes past my scheduled interview time, the receptionist finally directed me to the main conference room. The delay was a power move, one I'd experienced before. Make the candidate wait, establish dominance before they even enter the room. 5 people sat around a glass table that could have seated 20. At the head was Warren Reeves, Apex's CEO, a man whose LinkedIn profile featured more photos of him on yachts than in offices. To his right sat a woman with a tablet, her posture rigid, eyes alert. The other three were men in near-identical suits, their expressions ranging from bored to vaguely hostile. "Daniel Carter," Reeves said, not bothering to stand. His voice had that particular cadence of someone who believed his time was infinitely more valuable than mine. "Please, sit." No handshakes, no introductions of the panel. Another power move. I took the seat directly across from Reeves, maintaining eye contact, my back straight. "Thank you for seeing me today. Your resume is interesting," Reeves began, not acknowledging my thanks. He held the document between two fingers, as if it might contaminate him. Columbia MBA, followed by a series of what I can only describe as lateral moves. I had prepared for this. I've always prioritized growth opportunities over titles. At Innovate, I led projects that increased client retention by 28% and... Yes, Reeves waved his hand dismissively. "And then you were let go. The entire strategic development division was eliminated during a restructuring." I corrected, keeping my tone even. My performance reviews were consistently exceptional. The man to Reeves's left balding, with an aggressive jawline and a watch that probably cost more than my car's marked. Restructuring is often a convenient cover for performance issues. I felt heat rise in my neck, but kept my expression neutral. "I'm happy to put you in touch with my former supervisor." "That won't be necessary," Reeves said. "Tell me why you think you'd be a fit for Apex." For the next 20 minutes, I outlined my qualifications, experiences, and ideas for how I could contribute to their consulting practice. I drew on my research, suggesting specific strategies for their current clients. Throughout my answers, I noticed the woman with the tablet typing rapidly, while the three men exchanged occasional glances. "Your approach is very academic," Reeves said when I finished describing how I'd handled a particularly challenging client situation at Innovate. "Here at Apex, we pride ourselves on practical solutions and quick execution." "My academic background informs my practical approach," I replied. "Theory without application is useless, but application without theoretical understanding is unsustainable." One of the men younger than the others, with carefully styled hair, snorted. "That sounds like something from a business school textbook." I smiled tightly. "Actually, it's something Malcolm Chen used to say." At the mention of Malcolm's name, a subtle change came over the room. Reeves sat up straighter, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You work directly with Chen?" he asked, his tone shifting. "For 5 years," I said. "He was my direct supervisor and mentor." "Interesting." Reeves leaned back, studying me with new intensity. "Chen's new venture capital firm is making waves. Aggressive acquisitions, poaching talent." I nodded but said nothing. Malcolm's firm had indeed been in the business news lately, though I'd been too focused on my job search to follow the details. "Did he offer you a position?" the woman asked, her first contribution to the interview. "He did," I answered honestly. "Yet, here you are," Reeves said, his tone suggesting he'd found a weakness. "Why didn't you follow your mentor?" "Personal circumstances required a more established position at the time," I said carefully. "Or perhaps Chen didn't think you were quite ready for the big leagues," suggested the balding man, his smirk returning. Before I could respond, Reeves picked up my resume again, making a show of examining it. 6 months unemployed, he mused. "That's quite a gap in today's market." "The job market has been challenging," I acknowledged. "But I've been selective about where I apply. I'm looking for the right fit, not just any position." Reeves exchanged glances with his colleagues, a silent communication that excluded me entirely. Then he set my resume down with a finality that made my stomach tighten. "Mr. Carter," he said, leaning forward, "Apex Solutions maintains a certain standard in our hiring. Our consultants don't just advise clients, they become trusted partners. They have a particular polish, a gravitas that comes from consistent success." He paused, his eyes cold. "Looking at your employment history, your current situation, and yes, even your demeanor today, you don't look like someone who belongs here." The panel laughed. Not polite chuckles, but genuine laughter with an undercurrent of cruelty. The woman with the tablet stopped typing, her eyes flicking between me and Reeves with a hint of discomfort. 63 rejections. 63 variations of, "We've decided to pursue other candidates," and "Your qualifications are impressive, but..." 63 blows to my self-confidence, my sense of professional worth, my identity, and now this not just a rejection, but a public humiliation. Something inside me shifted. The constant anxiety that had been my companion for months suddenly crystallized into a cold clarity. I saw Reeves and his panel not as intimidating gatekeepers, but as what they truly were: insecure people using their temporary power to make themselves feel superior. I smiled. Not the desperate, "please hire me" smile I'd been wearing for months, but something genuine and sharp that seemed to catch Reeves off guard. "You're right," I said, standing slowly, gathering my portfolio with deliberate movements, "because in 2 months, I'll own this building." The laughter stopped abruptly. Reeves blinked, his expression flickering between confusion and irritation. "Thank you for your time," I added, my voice calm and assured. Then I walked out, closing the door behind me with a quiet click that somehow felt more powerful than a slam would have been. The elevator descent from the 47th floor was the longest ride of my life. My hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline coursed through my system. What had I just done? The words had emerged from some deep, unexamined part of me, a part that had apparently been taking notes during my months of rejection. "In 2 months, I'll own this building." It was absurd. I had less than 20, zero in savings, a mortgage underwater on a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, and credit card debt that grew each month. I couldn't afford to buy a parking space in Manhattan, let alone the Meridian Tower. And yet, as the elevator doors opened to the marble expanse of the lobby, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: power. Not the illusory power of a title or a corner office, but the essential power that comes from refusing to be diminished by others' judgment. Outside, the March wind cut through my suit jacket. I hadn't brought a Coata small economy when every subway fare mattered. The cold was clarifying though, sharpening the strange euphoria that had gripped me in the conference room. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Eric, my former colleague at Innovate, and one of the few people from my professional past who still checked in regularly. "How'd it go?" his message read. I stared at the screen, unsure how to answer. Professionally speaking, it had been a disaster. I had just incinerated any chance of employment at Apex Solutions. But personally, something had shifted, a tectonic movement in my sense of self. "Not well," I typed back, "but I need to see you. I have an idea." As I pressed send, my gaze drifted upward to the gleaming facade of Meridian Tower. From the street, the 47th floor was indistinguishable from the others, just another band of reflective glass in the monolith. Somewhere up there, Warren Reeves and his panel were probably still laughing, already forgetting the desperate job applicant who'd made a ridiculous claim before slinking away. Let them laugh. For the first time in months, I had something more valuable than their approval. I had a purpose. My phone buzzed again. Eric had responded. "Murphy's at 7. What's this about?" "Everything," I replied. "See you there." Murphy's was a dive bar 3 blocks from the Innovate Systems officer regular haunt during those now distant days of job security and career optimism. The familiar smell of beer and decades-old wood polish greeted me as I pushed through the door, scanning the afterwork crowd for Eric's familiar face. He sat in our usual corner booth, 2 beers already on the table. Eric Zhang had been Innovate's data analysis wizard, the guy who could make numbers tell stories that even the most tech-phobic executives could understand. When the layoffs came, he'd landed on his feet at a financial services firm, his skills too valuable in the data-driven marketplace to leave him unemployed for long. "You look different," he said, as I slid into the booth across from him. "Did Apex actually make you an offer?" I laughed, the sound sharper than I intended. "Not exactly. I told the CEO I'd own his building in 2 months, then walked out." Eric choked on his beer. "You what?" I recounted the interview, the casual cruelty, the moment something in me had snapped. Eric's expression shifted from shock to concern to something like admiration. "That's ballsy," he said finally. "Completely insane, but ballsy." It felt good, I admitted, taking a sip of my beer. But now I'm 1 rejection deeper and running out of companies to apply to. You could always call Malcolm, Eric suggested, not for the first time. His offer is probably still open. I'd been avoiding Malcolm's occasional texts, embarrassed by my unemployment and reluctant to admit he'd been right about the instability of corporate positions. Maybe, I said noncommittally. But first, I want to run something by you. Eric raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Before the interview, I did some digging into Apex's financials, I explained, leaning forward. Something didn't add up. They've got prime Manhattan real estate, a roster of blue-chip clients, but their quarterly reports show cash flow problems. They're spending too much on executive perks and not enough on infrastructure and talent development. So, Eric shrugged, lots of companies run lean to make their numbers look good. This is more than running lean, I insisted. Their client retention rate is dropping. Their Glassdoor reviews from employees are abysmal. And they've got millions tied up in proprietary software systems that they're not leveraging effectively. Eric's analytical mind was already engaged. Sounds like they're primed for a turnaround specialist. Exactly, I said, the excitement I'd been containing now spilling into my voice. Or an acquisition. Eric's eyes widened as he caught my meaning. You can't be serious. What if I am? I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app where I'd been tracking Apex's public financial information. Look at their market position versus their actual valuation. They're vulnerable. Even if that's true, Eric said slowly, you still can't afford to buy them out. That was just something you said in the heat of the moment. I can't, I agreed. But Malcolm can. Eric stared at me. You want to pitch your former boss on acquiring the company that just humiliated you in an interview? When he put it that way, it did sound absurd, but the idea had been crystallizing in my mind during the walk to Murphy's, taking shape with each step. What does Malcolm's firm specialize in, I asked. Undervalued tech assets, Eric replied automatically. Companies with strong intellectual property or market position, but weak management. Exactly. And what is Apex? Eric took a long pull of his beer, studying me over the rim of the glass. You're really serious about this. Reeves said I don't belong there, I said, a new edge in my voice. He's right. I don't belong working under someone like him. But what if I didn't have to? This is crazy, Eric muttered, but I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Eric had never been able to resist an interesting problem. Even if Malcolm was interested, the due diligence alone would take months. You told Reeves 2 months. So we'll work fast, I said. The beer sat untouched in front of me, the adrenaline of possibility more intoxicating than alcohol. Will you help me put together a proposal? No one knows data analysis like you do. Eric hesitated, then slowly nodded. I must be as crazy as you are. But yeah, I'll help. On one condition. Name it. If this somehow works, and that's a massive if I want in. Not just helping from the sidelines. In. I reached across the table, offering my hand. Deal. As we shook, I felt something I'd thought was lost forever in the humiliation of unemployment. Hope. The next 3 days passed in a blur of research and analysis. Eric took a sick day from his new job, and we commandeered a corner table at a coffee shop with reliable Wi-Fi, our laptops open, papers spread between us. Their client list is impressive, Eric noted, scrolling through the data we'd compiled. But look at these contract renewal dates. 3 of their biggest clients are coming up for review in the next quarter. I nodded, making a note. And from the public complaints on Twitter, at least one is unhappy with their latest project delivery. We were building what Malcolm would call a vulnerability profile, a comprehensive assessment of Apex's strengths, weaknesses, and potential value. The more we dug, the more convinced I became that my impulsive declaration in that conference room might not have been as far-fetched as it seemed. Apex Solutions had a solid foundation, valuable intellectual property, a prestigious client list, and a prime location. But under Warren Reeves's leadership, cracks had formed. Employee turnover was high, client satisfaction was dropping, and most importantly, their cash position was weaker than their public image suggested. They took on debt for that vanity acquisition last year, Eric said, pointing to a news item about Apex purchasing a smaller competitor. Then the market turned, and the synergies they projected never materialized. Classic case of an ego-driven CEO, I agreed. Reeves wanted the prestige of the acquisition more than he wanted a sound business strategy. By the third night, fueled by coffee and the growing certainty that we were onto something, we had compiled a 20-page analysis of Apex Solutions, their true financial position, their vulnerabilities, and most importantly, their potential value under different management. "This is solid," Eric said, leaning back in his chair and stretching. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He'd been pulling double duty, working his day job, then joining me for these late-night strategy sessions. But will it be enough to convince Malcolm? I stared at the document on my screen, the culmination of our work. It was thorough, data-driven, and compelling. But was it enough to convince a venture capitalist to make a multi-million-dollar acquisition? "Only one way to find out," I said, reaching for my phone. The text to Malcolm was simple. "I need to meet. It's about an opportunity I should have taken 3 years ago." His reply came at 3:17 a.m. "Breakfast tomorrow, the usual place, 7 a.m. The usual place was a small diner 2 blocks from Innovate's office, where Malcolm and I had held countless morning strategy sessions during my time at the company. As I approached, I spotted him already seated in his preferred booth by the window, a cup of black coffee in front of him. Malcolm Chen didn't look like a typical venture capitalist. No expensive suit, no flashy watch. Instead, he wore a simple button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing the tattoo on his forearm, a Chinese character that he once told me meant persistence. At 45, his black hair was threaded with silver at the temples, and fine lines had formed around his eyes. The result, he joked, of reading too many business plans in dim light. He stood as I approached, his handshake firm, his smile genuine. "Daniel, it's good to see you." I slid into the booth across from him, acutely aware of my appearance. 4 months of unemployment had left their Mark Me haircut overdue, my once crisp button-down showing signs of too many wearings. "You look like hell," Malcolm said bluntly, but there was concern rather than criticism in his tone. "Job hunting will do that to you," I replied. The waitress appeared, and I ordered coffee, my stomach too knotted with anxiety to consider food. Malcolm, however, ordered his usual eggs over easy, wheat toast, side of fruit. "So," he said once the waitress had departed, "what's this opportunity we're discussing at 7 in the morning?" I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment that would either validate my conference room declaration or confirm it as the desperate bravado of an unemployed man. "I want to talk to you about Apex Solutions," I said. Malcolm's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes' interest, perhaps recognition of the name. Warren Reeves's outfit. Mid-sized consulting firm, specializes in financial systems integration. Of course he knew them. Malcolm made it his business to know every player in the tech consulting ecosystem. "I interviewed there yesterday," I said. "It didn't go well." A small smile touched Malcolm's lips. Define didn't go well. I hesitated, then decided honesty was the only approach that would work with Malcolm. Reeves told me I didn't look like I belonged there. I told him in 2 months I'd own the building. Then I walked out. Malcolm's smile widened into a genuine grin. "Now that," he said, leaning forward, "sounds like the Daniel Carter I hired out of Columbia." His expression sobered. "But making declarations is easy. Backing them up is harder. I assume you're here because you have a plan." The waitress returned with my coffee and Malcolm's breakfast. As she arranged the plates, I pulled my laptop from my bag, steeling myself for the pitch of my life. Apex Solutions is undervalued and mismanaged. I began once we were alone again. They have valuable intellectual property, a blue-chip client list, and market positioning that a competitor, an investment firm, could leverage for significant returns. Malcolm took a bite of his toast, his expression neutral. "Go on." For the next 20 minutes, I outlined the research Eric and I had compiled. I walked Malcolm through Apex's financial vulnerabilities, their management weaknesses, their untapped potential. I explained how their proprietary software platform, currently underutilized, could be scaled across a broader client base. How their talent retention problems stemmed from Reeves's leadership style rather than compensation issues. How their cash flow challenges created an acquisition opportunity that wouldn't last long. Throughout my presentation, Malcolm ate methodically, his eyes never leaving my face. He asked occasional questions sharp, probing questions that tested the depth of my research and the soundness of my assumptions. The Malcolm Chen interrogation technique was familiar from my days at Innovate. He would find any weakness in your argument and press on it until either it collapsed or proved resilient. Finally, as I concluded, he pushed his empty plate aside and leaned back in the booth. "So," he said, his expression unreadable, "you want me to acquire Apex Solutions, a multi-million-dollar company with over 100 employees and a Manhattan office, because their CEO was rude to you in an interview. Put that way, it sounded ridiculous. Personal, petty." "No," I said firmly. "I want you to acquire Apex because it's a sound business decision that aligns with your investment strategy." The interview was just what brought them to my attention. Malcolm studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "And what do you get out of this?" The question caught me off guard. In my feverish planning of the past 3 days, I'd been so focused on proving the acquisition made sense that I hadn't fully articulated what I wanted from it. "A job," I said honestly. "A chance to prove what I can do when I'm not constrained by someone else's vision." "Be specific, Daniel," Malcolm pressed. "What job?" I met his gaze steadily. "Chief Strategy Officer, at minimum, with the authority to implement the changes needed to turn Apex around." Malcolm's eyebrows rose. "At minimum? Ambitious." "Realistic," I countered. "I know their business inside out now. I know what needs to change, and I have the right background to make those changes happen." "And your friend Eric?" Malcolm asked, surprising me. "The one who helped you compile this analysis, judging by the data visualization style, what does he get?" I should have known Malcolm would recognize Eric's distinct approach to data presentation. "Head of Data Analytics," I said without hesitation. "He's wasted at his current position, and you know it." Malcolm nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You've thought this through." "As thoroughly as possible in 3 days," I admitted. Malcolm was silent for a long moment, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the table. Then he reached for his phone, typed something quickly, and put it away. "I've just sent a message to my head of acquisitions," he said. "We'll need to move quickly if we want to stay ahead of Apex's cash flow issues. I'm guessing they have a payment crunch coming up?" My heart skipped a beat. "End of the quarter," I confirmed. 5 weeks from now." "Then we'll need to move faster than that," Malcolm signaled for the check. "My team will want to verify your analysis. If it holds up, we'll make an approach through intermediaries. Reeves can't know it's UCU until the deal is done." "So you're in?" I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. Malcolm's expression softened slightly. "Daniel, when I offered you a position at my new firm, it wasn't charity or sentimentality. It was because I recognized talent." "You just proved me right," he leaned forward. "But understand this. If we do this, it's not about revenge. It's about business. The moment your personal feelings interfere with sound judgment is the moment I pull the plug. Are we clear?" "Completely," I said, relief and excitement surging through me. "Good," Malcolm stood, placing money on the table for the bill. "Be at my office tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring your friend Eric. And Daniel?" "Yes?" "Get a haircut and a new shirt. If we're doing this, you need to look the part." As he walked away, I sat stunned in the booth, the remains of my untouched coffee growing cold. Had that really just happened? Had a 20-minute pitch over breakfast potentially changed the trajectory of my career and made my impulsive declaration to Warren Reeves actually achievable? My phone buzzed with a text from Eric. "Well?" "He's in," I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly with adrenaline. "Meeting tomorrow at 9. Be ready." Eric's response came instantly. "Holy shit, we're really doing this?" I looked out the diner window at the Manhattan skyline, at the countless glass and steel towers housing companies like Apex, run by people like Warren Reeves. For months, those buildings had represented rejection, exclusion, a world I could no longer access. "Yes," I texted back, "we're really doing this." Malcolm's new firm occupied a loft space in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, a deliberate departure from the Manhattan offices of his corporate past. The open floor plan, exposed brick walls, and clusters of standing desks projected the image of a company more concerned with innovation than appearance. Eric and I arrived at 8, 6:45 a.m., both of us having taken significant steps to improve our presentations since the diner meeting. I'd gotten a haircut, bought a new shirt, and splurged on dry cleaning for my suit. Eric, always more fashion conscious than me, had arrived in a sharp charcoal ensemble that made him look like he belonged on a financial magazine cover rather than behind a computer screen. Malcolm's assistant, a young woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and a tablet permanently in, handled us to a conference room where 4 people already waited. Malcolm, an older man with silver hair and a military posture, and 2 younger associates with the alert, analytical expressions of recent MBA graduates. Daniel, Eric, Malcolm nodded to us. This is Howard Mercer, my head of acquisitions. He gestured to the silver-haired man. And these are Priya and Jason from our analysis team. Howard Mercer studied us with the appraising gaze of someone who had evaluated hundreds of business deals over decades. Malcolm tells me you've identified an acquisition target with significant upside potential. Yes, sir, I replied, setting up my laptop to present the analysis we'd prepared. Before we begin, Mercer said, I want to be clear about something. Malcolm mentioned there's a personal element to this for you. His tone was not accusatory but matter of fact. I don't care about that. I care about returns. If this is a revenge fantasy dressed up as a business proposal, we're all wasting our time. I met his gaze steadily. The personal element is what brought Apex to my attention. The business case is why we're here today. Mercer held my gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. Proceed. For the next 2 hours, Eric and I presented our analysis of Apex Solutions more detailed now than what I'd shown Malcolm, with additional research we'd conducted overnight. We outlined the company's intellectual property assets, their client relationships, their market position, and, most importantly, the specific vulnerabilities that created the acquisition opportunity. Throughout the presentation, Priya and Jason took notes and occasionally asked pointed questions about our data sources and methodologies. Mercer remained largely silent, his expression giving nothing away. Malcolm, who had already heard much of this, watched the room more than the presentation, gauging his team's reactions. Their cash position is weaker than their public filings suggest, Eric explained, bringing up a graph that correlated their accounts receivable with their upcoming payment obligations. They've been extending payment terms to clients, while their own vendor payments are coming due. That creates a liquidity crunch that will hit in approximately 4 weeks. And you believe this makes them acquisition targets? Priya asked, her tone skeptical. Couldn't they simply seek bridge financing? They could, I acknowledged, but that would dilute existing shareholders and potentially trigger covenants in their current debt agreements. Reeves and his executive team own substantial equity. They'd resist that option. Unless they had no choice, Mercer noted, speaking for the first time in several minutes. Exactly, I agreed, which is why timing is critical. If we move before they secure alternative financing, we can approach with an all-cash offer that would be attractive to shareholders while still representing good value for us. And what would you do with Apex once acquired? Jason asked. Their current management clearly has issues. I glanced at Eric, who nodded encouragingly. This was the moment to demonstrate that our plan went beyond acquisition to implementation. First, leadership changes, I said firmly. Reeves and his inner circle would need to go. They've created a culture of short-term thinking and executive privilege at the expense of client service and employee development. Replace them with whom? Mercer asked, though his tone suggested he already knew my answer. A transition team, I said, led by people who understand both Apex's business model and its potential. People with the right mix of analytical skills and strategic vision. People like you and Eric, Malcolm stated, making it clear to everyone in the room what we were proposing. Yes, I said without hesitation. We've studied their business model, identified the weaknesses, and developed a plan to address them. With the right backing, we could implement that plan effectively. Mercer leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Bold, he said finally, but not impossible. The meeting concluded with Mercer assigning Priya and Jason to verify our analysis independently and develop a valuation model for the potential acquisition. Malcolm walked Eric and me out personally, pausing in the reception area. You impressed, Mercer, he said. That's not easy to do. Is that good or bad? Eric asked. Malcolm smiled slightly. Good, if your analysis holds up. Bad if you've overreached. Howard doesn't forget when people waste his time. Our analysis is solid, I said with more confidence than I felt. We'll see. Malcolm checked his watch. Give Priya and Jason 48 hours to verify your work. If everything checks out, we'll move to the next phase. In the meantime, start thinking about what a transition plan would actually look like. Specifics, not generalities. As Eric and I left the building, the spring sunshine felt symbolic a break in the long winter of unemployment and rejection. We walked in silence for a block, both processing the magnitude of what we'd just set in motion. Do you think they'll really do it? Eric finally asked. By Apex, I mean. I considered the question carefully. If the numbers work, yes. Malcolm doesn't make emotional decisions, but he recognizes opportunity. And Apex is an opportunity. And if they do buy it, Eric continued, do you really think they'll put us in charge of the transition? That was the more uncertain proposition. Malcolm might see the business case for acquiring Apex without necessarily believing that Eric and I were the right people to lead the post-acquisition phase. I don't know, I admitted. But even if they don't, we've proven our value. That's more than I had a week ago. Eric nodded, processing this. What about your declaration to Reeves? About owning the building in 2 months? I laughed, the sound bouncing off the Brooklyn storefronts around us. Technically, if Malcolm's firm acquires Apex, and I have an executive position in the new structure, I'd have partial ownership interest in their lease of the 47th floor. Not quite owning the building, but close enough for my purposes. Eric grinned. I'd pay good money to see Reeves's face when he realizes who's behind the acquisition. The thought had crossed my mind too more than crossed it, if I was being honest. The image of Warren Reeves realizing that the job candidate he'd humiliated was now involved in buying his company had sustained me through the sleepless nights of preparing our analysis. Remember what Malcolm said, I cautioned, as much to myself as to Eric. This isn't about revenge, it's about business. Right, Eric agreed, his tone skeptical. Pure business. As we parted ways at the subway station, Eric returning to his current job, to me to my apartment to begin work on the transition plan, I tried to focus on the strategic aspects of our proposal rather than the personal satisfaction I'd feel if it succeeded. But the memory of that conference room, of Reeves's dismissive tone and his panel's cruel laughter, kept surfacing despite my efforts. You don't look like someone who belongs here. Soon, I might have the chance to prove just how wrong he was. The next 48 hours were among the most stressful of my life. Every hour that passed without word from Malcolm's team seemed to confirm my worst fears that they had found flaws in our analysis, that the acquisition wouldn't proceed, that my moment of defiance in Apex's conference room would remain just that, a moment without consequences. I channeled my anxiety into work, developing a detailed transition plan for Apex post-acquisition. I identified key personnel to retain, systems to overhaul, and client relationships to prioritize. I created timelines, budget projections, and organizational charts. I even drafted communications plans for employees, clients, and vendors. When my phone finally rang on the evening of the second day, I almost dropped it in my haste to answer. Daniel, Malcolm's voice was calm, betraying nothing. We need to talk. Can you come to the office now? On my way, I said, already reaching for my jacket. 40 minutes later, I was back in Malcolm's Brooklyn loft space. This time, in a smaller meeting room with just Malcolm and Howard Mercer present. A folder sat on the table between us, closed. Take a seat, Malcolm said, gesturing to the chair across from them. I sat, trying to read their expressions. Mercer's poker face was impenetrable, but Malcolm had a slight tension around his eyes that could indicate either concern or excitement. Priya and Jason completed their analysis, Mercer said without preamble. He opened the folder and slid a document across the table to me. Your assessment of Apex's vulnerabilities was accurate, but conservative. I glanced down at the paper of financial analysis showing Apex's cash position as even weaker than Eric and I had projected. They've been misleading investors about their accounts receivable, Mercer continued. Several major clients are behind on payments, and they've been masking that in their reporting. That's worse than we thought, I said, scanning the numbers. It also creates a more urgent acquisition timeline, Malcolm added. and potentially a legal liability that would need to be factored into any offer. But you're still considering an offer? I asked, trying to keep the hope from my voice. Mercer and Malcolm exchanged glances. Yes, Mercer said finally. The fundamentals of your proposal remain sound. Apex has valuable assets that are being mismanaged. With the right leadership and financial backing, those assets could be leveraged more effectively. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by a new anxiety. And the transition team? Malcolm leaned forward. That's what we need to discuss. Howard and I believe that your understanding of Apex's business model and your motivation to succeed make you valuable to the post-acquisition phase. However, Mercer interjected, placing someone with no executive management experience in charge of a 100-person organization would be irresponsible, regardless of how promising that individual might be. My heart sank. They were going to acquire Apex, but bring in their own leadership team. I'd be sidelined, perhaps given some minor role that would technically fulfill Malcolm's promise, but not provide the opportunity I'd envisioned. We're proposing a compromise, Malcolm said, seeming to read my thoughts. If the acquisition proceeds, I would serve as interim CEO for the first 6 months. You would be Chief Strategy Officer, as you requested, with direct responsibility for client relationships and strategic direction. Eric would head data analytics. Both of you would report directly to me, with clear paths to promotion based on performance. And after 6 months? I asked. If the transition is successful, we reassess, Malcolm said. I have other ventures that require my attention. My role at Apex would always be temporary. It wasn't exactly what I had proposed, but it was far more than I'd had a week ago. A C-suite position, albeit with training wheels in the form of Malcolm's oversight. A genuine chance to prove what I could do. There's one more thing, Mercer said, his tone cautious. The acquisition would happen through a shell company. Neither your name nor Malcolm's would be associated with it publicly until after the deal closed. Why? I asked, though I suspected the answer. Because if Reeves knew who was behind the offer, he might reject it out of spite, even if it meant damaging his own financial interests. Malcolm explained. Business decisions should be rational, but humans rarely are. I nodded, understanding the strategy. So when would he find out? At the closing meeting, Mercer said, when it's too late for him to back out. The thought of that meant of Reeves realizing who was behind the acquisition that would effectively end his leadership of Apex sent a surge of anticipation through me that I tried not to show. Are we agreed on these terms? Malcolm asked. I extended my hand. We're agreed. As we shook, Malcolm held my gaze. Remember, Daniel, business, not personal. Understood, I said, knowing that even as I spoke the words, part of me still savored the thought of Reeves's recognition when he finally saw me again, not as a desperate job applicant, but as part of the team that had acquired his company. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Malcolm's acquisition team moved with remarkable efficiency, establishing the shell company Meridian Holdings, named with deliberate irony, after the building where Apex maintained their office and making the initial approach through intermediaries. Eric and I were kept at arm's length from the direct negotiations, but Malcolm provided regular updates. Apex's financial situation was deteriorating faster than even our revised projections had indicated. A major client had cancelled their contract, citing delays and quality issues. 2 senior developers had resigned, taking their expertise to a competitor. And rumors of cash flow problems had begun to circulate in the industry, making vendors nervous and clients hesitant. Reeves is getting desperate, Malcolm told us during one update meeting. He's approached 3 different banks about bridge financing, but his terms are unfavorable. Has he considered other acquisition offers? I asked. 2, Malcolm confirmed. Both lowball offers from competitors looking to pick up their client list on the cheap. He rejected them outright. And our offer? Eric asked. Still under consideration, Malcolm said. Our intermediaries presented it as coming from a private equity firm interested in expanding into tech consulting. The price is fair, not so high as to raise suspicions, but high enough to be attractive given their situation. When do you expect an answer? I asked. Malcolm checked his phone. Our deadline is tomorrow at 5 p.m. After that, the offer reduces by 10% every 48 hours. Creating urgency, Eric noted with approval. Exactly, Malcolm agreed. Reeves needs to feel that this is his best option, but also that it won't remain available indefinitely. I nodded, impressed by the strategy. This was the Malcolm Chen I remembered from Innovate Methodical, Strategic, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. And if he accepts? I asked. Then we move to the next phase, Malcolm said. Due diligence, paperwork, and preparation for the transition. He glanced between Eric and me, which means you two need to be ready. The moment the deal is announced internally, there will be panic. Employees fearing layoffs, clients considering jumping ship, competitors circling. We'll need to move quickly to stabilize the situation. We're ready, I assured him, though the magnitude of what we were undertaking had begun to sink in. If the acquisition went through, Eric and I wouldn't just be getting the executive titles we'd proposed, we'd be taking on genuine responsibility for a company in crisis, with 100 employees whose livelihoods would depend on our ability to right the ship. The following day, I was at Malcolm's office by 4 p.m., too anxious to stay in my apartment waiting for news. Eric joined us at 4:30, having left his current job early with a vague excuse about a medical appointment. At 4:47, Malcolm's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, then at us, before answering and stepping out of the room. Eric and I sat in tense silence, neither wanting to speculate aloud about the call's purpose. When Malcolm returned 5 minutes later, his expression was unreadable. "Well?" I finally asked, unable to bear the suspense. A slow smile spread across Malcolm's face. They've accepted the offer pending due diligence. Reeves drove a hard bargain on the final price, but ultimately took the deal. Eric let out a whoop of triumph, jumping from his chair. I remained seated, a strange mix of emotions washing over me: elation, vindication, but also a sudden, sobering awareness of responsibility. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Malcolm said, "we prepare to take control of a company in crisis. The real work is just beginning." The following week blurred into a series of meetings, document reviews, and strategy sessions. Malcolm's due diligence team descended on Apex like a swarm of particularly methodical locusts, examining every contract, financial statement, and client relationship. Eric and I worked with them, providing context and insights based on our analysis. To maintain the fiction that the acquisition was coming from an anonymous private equity firm, we conducted most of our work from Malcolm's Brooklyn office, rather than visiting Apex directly. But the reports that came back confirmed much of what we'd suspected. Apex was a company with strong fundamentals being mismanaged into crisis. Their software platform is actually more advanced than we thought, Eric noted during one review session. The architecture is solid, they just haven't invested in the user experience, layer, or scalability. And their client relationships are salvageable? I added, most of the complaints stem from execution issues, not strategic misalignment. With better project management and more transparent communication, we could turn those around quickly. Malcolm nodded, making notes. What about personnel? Who stays? Who goes? This was the hardest part of our planning. Eric and I had spent days reviewing employee profiles, performance reviews, and team structures, trying to identify who would be essential to the transition and who might be resistant to new leadership. The development team is strong, Eric said. Their lead architect is brilliant, just frustrated by lack of resources. We should prioritize retaining him and his core team. The project management office needs an overhaul, I continued. The current director is a Reeves loyalist with minimal actual PM experience, but there's a senior manager 2 levels down who's been doing the real work. She should be promoted. As the due diligence period neared its end, we finalized our transition plan, a detailed roadmap for the first 90 days post-acquisition, with specific actions for each department, communication strategies for key stakeholders, and contingency plans for various scenarios. This is impressive work, Malcolm said, as we presented the final plan. Very thorough. We've had motivation to be thorough, I replied. Malcolm's expression turned serious. Apex's board approved the acquisition this morning. We close in 3 days. That's when Reeves and his executive team will learn who's really behind Meridian Holdings. The moment I'd been both anticipating and dreading was finally approaching. Will we be there? I asked. You and Eric will accompany me to the closing meeting, Malcolm confirmed. As the incoming executive team, your presence is appropriate. And necessary, he added with a slight smile, given that you'll need to start managing the transition immediately afterward. 3 days. In 3 days, I would face Warren Reeves again, not as a job applicant desperate for approval, but as part of the team that had acquired his company. The thought sent a complicated mix of emotions through me: satisfaction, anxiety, and a lingering trace of the anger that had fueled my declaration in that conference room weeks ago. "Remember," Malcolm said, seeming to read my thoughts, "when we walk into that room, we are professionals completing a business transaction, nothing more." "Understood," I said, though I wondered if I truly did understand if I could set aside the personal element that had initiated this entire chain of events. The night before the closing meeting, I lay awake in my apartment, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would mark exactly 7 weeks since my disastrous interview at Apex. 7 weeks, since I'd made an impulsive claim that had somehow, against all odds, led to this moment. My phone buzzed with a text from Eric. "Ready for tomorrow?" I considered the question carefully. Was I ready? Not just for the meeting itself, but for what would come after the responsibility of helping to lead a company through transition, of making decisions that would affect 100 employees and dozens of clients. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. Eric's response came quickly. "Remember why we're doing this?" That was the question that had kept me awake. Why exactly were we doing this? For the professional opportunity? Certainly. For the chance to prove our abilities in executive roles? Absolutely. But there was another reason. One I had tried to minimize in discussions with Malcolm, but that remained undeniably present: to prove Warren Reeves wrong. To show him and everyone who had rejected me over the past months that their assessments had been mistaken. "You don't look like someone who belongs here." Tomorrow, I would walk into Apex's conference room not as someone seeking belonging, but as someone who had earned the right to be there through strategy, persistence, and a refusal to accept rejection as the final word. My final text to Eric was simple: "For all the right reasons." But as sleep finally claimed me in the early hours of the morning, I wasn't entirely sure what those right reasons were anymore. The morning of the closing meeting dawned clear and bright, a perfect spring day that seemed designed to mirror my mood: hopeful, energized, alive with possibility. I dressed with care, choosing a new suit I'd purchased the previous weekend, my first significant expenditure since the layoffs, justified now by my imminent return to employment. Malcolm had arranged for a car service to collect Eric and me, bringing us to his office where we would review final details before proceeding to Apex's offices for the 11 a.m. meeting. As we rode through the morning traffic, Eric fidgeted with his tie, betraying his own nervousness. "Strange, isn't it?" he said as we crossed the Brooklyn Bridge. "A month ago, we were both just trying to survive. Now we're about to become executives at a company that rejected you." "Life comes at you fast," I agreed, watching the Manhattan skyline grow closer. "Are you having second thoughts about leaving your current job?" Eric laughed. "Are you kidding? This is the opportunity of a lifetime. I'm just still processing how quickly it all happened." That was the surreal element, the acceleration from desperation to opportunity, from rejection to acquisition, all in less than 2 months. The car pulled up to Malcolm's building, where we found him waiting in the lobby, accompanied by Howard Mercer and 2 members of his legal team. "Gentlemen," Malcolm greeted us, his tone businesslike, "the documents are prepared. Reeves and his board will be expecting representatives from Meridian Holdings to formally complete the acquisition. They are not yet aware of our identities." He fixed me with a pointed look. "I want to be clear about how this will proceed. We will enter the meeting, exchange pleasantries, and sign the documents. This is not the time for personal comments or gloating." "Understood," I said, somewhat offended that he felt the need to remind me. "Good." Malcolm nodded. "Because regardless of how this acquisition began, what matters now is what we do with the company moving forward. That starts the moment we walk into that conference room." The journey to Meridian Tower passed in tense silence, each of us absorbed in our own thoughts. As the elevator climbed to the 47th floor, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Same elevator, the same destination, but with radically different circumstances. Apex's receptionist, the same woman who had kept me waiting before my interview, greeted us with the professional courtesy reserved for expected visitors. "Mr. "Reeves and the board are waiting in the main conference room," she said, not recognizing me behind Malcolm as our group was led down the corridor. And then we were there outside the same conference room where, 7 weeks earlier, I had made my defiant declaration. Malcolm glanced at me, a final silent reminder of professionalism before the doors were opened and we entered. Warren Reeves sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by 4 board members and the company's legal counsel. His expression as we filed in was neutral, the practiced poker face of an executive about to complete a significant transaction. Then his eyes fell on me. The change in his expression was subtle but unmistakable, a flicker of confusion, followed by dawning recognition, and finally, a carefully controlled anger that tightened the corners of his mouth. "Mr. Reeves," Malcolm said smoothly, stepping forward with extended hand. "I'm Malcolm Chen, CEO of Meridian Holdings. Thank you for meeting with us today." Reeves rose slowly, his eyes still fixed on me even as he shook Malcolm's hand. "Mr. Chen, I wasn't aware you were behind Meridian Holdings." "A recent venture," Malcolm replied. "Allow me to introduce my team. This is Howard Mercer, our head of acquisitions, our legal counsel, Ms. Rodriguez, and Mr. Patel." He gestured to Eric and me last. "And our incoming executive team for Apex Solutions post-acquisition, Eric Zhang, who will head data analytics, and Daniel Carter, who will serve as Chief Strategy Officer during the transition." At the mention of my title, a murmur ran through the Apex board members. Reeves's expression hardened further, but he maintained his composure with visible effort. "I believe Mr. Carter and I have met," he said, his voice tight. "Yes," I replied simply, offering my hand. "We have." For a moment, I thought he might refuse to shake. The hesitation lasted only seconds but felt much longer, a suspended moment when the personal nature of this transaction hung palpably in the air. Then, with professional resignation, Reeves took my hand. His grip was cold, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and realization. "You said 2 months," he said quietly, for my ears only. "It's been less than 2. I couldn't help the small smile that formed. "I work efficiently." Malcolm cleared his throat pointedly, and I released Reeves's hand, the momentary satisfaction giving way to the professional demeanor required for the rest of the meeting. The actual signing proceeded with business-like efficiency. Documents were reviewed, signatures applied, hands shaken. Throughout it all, Reeves maintained a rigid professionalism, though his eyes occasionally flicked to me with undisguised resentment. When the final document was signed, Malcolm stood. "Thank you, gentlemen. Effective immediately, Apex Solutions is now a subsidiary of Meridian Holdings. Mr. Carter, Mr. Paxay, Zhang, and I will be meeting with department heads this afternoon to discuss the transition. Mr. Reeves, as discussed, you'll be departing immediately, but will remain available for consultation as needed for the next 2 weeks." Reeves nodded stiffly. "My office will be cleared by the end of the day." As the meeting concluded and people began to file out, Reeves remained seated, staring at the signed documents before him. I paused at the door, a moment of empathy unexpectedly tempering my satisfaction. Whatever his flaws as a leader, this was a difficult day, for him the loss of a company he had built. "Mr. Reeves," I said quietly. He looked up, his expression guarded. "For what it's worth," I continued, "Apex has a strong foundation. That speaks well of its founder." He studied me for a long moment, perhaps searching for mockery in my words. Finding none, he nodded slightly. "Take care of my people, Carter." "I will," I promised, and in that moment, I truly meant it not as a competitive boast or a personal triumph, but as a professional commitment. Outside in the corridor, Malcolm waited, one eyebrow raised questioningly. "Just establishing a professional rapport for the consultation period," I explained. Malcolm nodded, seemingly satisfied. "The real work starts now," he said, gesturing toward the open office where Apex's employees worked, still unaware that their company had just changed hands. "Are you ready?" I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment, the humiliation of unemployment, the sting of rejection, the desperate declaration that had somehow become reality. But more importantly, I thought about the responsibility that now rested on my shoulders, not just to prove Warren Reeves wrong, but to prove Malcolm right in his faith in me. To validate Eric's decision to join this venture. to justify the trust of the 100 employees whose professional lives would be affected by decisions I would help make. "I'm ready," I said. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Eric, who had gone ahead to prepare the conference room for the employee announcement. "Stage is set. Time to belong here." If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. Have you ever had a moment where someone underestimated you, only for you to prove them wrong? Drop your experiences in the comments below.